Welcome to this special presentation of Asian American Life, the Forgotten War 70 years after the armistice. I'm Vivian Lee, your host. The armistice, or ceasefire, that stopped active fighting on the Korean Peninsula on July 27, 1953, did not end the war that had begun 3 years earlier. It just put it on pause. Though a pledge to work toward a peace treaty was part of that armistice, 7 decades have passed without one. This is why news there becomes news here. North Korea's claim to have tested its first solid-fuel intercontinental ballistic missile in April. The completion of what they claimed in May was the country's first military spy satellite. And a law back in January authorizing a preemptive nuclear strike against its enemies, South Korea and the U.S. In this special, we present stories of those who fought in the war. Stories of North and South Koreans who made the U.S. their home, and peace activists sounding an urgent call to work on a peace treaty now. First, a recap of how we got here. The war began at dawn on June 25, 1950, a surprise attack by Communist North Korea of its democratic and capitalist neighbor, South Korea. The juggernaut of 80,000 North Korean troops and Soviet tanks crossed the border at the 38th parallel and routed South Korea's smaller army. The North then took the South's capital, Seoul. Kim Il-sung, backed by Stalin and Mao, believed he had read the political tea leaves correctly.
He seems to have thought that sudden attack can unify the entire Korean peninsula in a quite quick time. So of course, looking back on the history, it was a miscalculation.
A miscalculation based on political strife that had rattled the peninsula since its division at the end of World War II. Japan's surrender to the Allies meant all of its colonial subjects, including Korea, were free. The Soviets took trusteeship of North Korea, the U.S. of the South. But to consolidate power, Kim and his counterpart in South Korea, Syngman Rhee, each targeted political opponents.
Anti-communism was quite real during the 3-year period from 1945 to 1948. The U.S. military government tried to disband all those, communist-related, organizations. And then Korean, leftists actually did a lot of strikes and also widespread poverty in the South. So we may say it was a kind of chaos.
And so, the stage for the world's first Cold War confrontation was set. The UN Security Council condemned North Korea's invasion, authorized a multinational force under UN command to help South Korea, and American boots were on the ground within days, joining South Korea's troops. North Korea would gain significant territory before the U.S.'s superior air power turned the tide for the UN command. By then, millions of Koreans were refugees, many from North Korea, which was carpet-bombed. But after Pyongyang fell to South Korea and its allies, China's Mao sent 300,000 of his troops to help North Korea's army. And with them came 2 years of brutal, stymied warfare. In 1952, 21-year-old Jack Doxey was studying at Brooklyn's St. John's University when he got Uncle Sam's call. As a combat rifleman with the 7th Regiment of the 3rd Infantry Division, one of Corporal Doxey's tasks was examining dead enemy fighters for intelligence.
It's a gruesome experience, but I was basically just a kid, but they told me what to look for and things like that. So I rifled through their bodies, and I came up with letters from home. In their wallets, they had pictures of their family and things of that sort. And it struck me that I had a very interconnectedness with these people, even though we declared them, quote unquote, as the enemy.
In the chaos of war, Doxey dodged enemy and friendly fire.
American jets would come over. They would come down, swoop them down, and be shooting 50 caliber machine guns. Now, they were so close that on more than one occasion, they mistook our line for being North Korea's line. And there was a soldier next to me that was shot right through the chest.
Doxey says fighting intensified as word spread of a possible armistice, the talks for which had actually begun mere months after war broke out because of fear the war would turn nuclear. On July 27, 1953, after nearly 160 negotiations, Kim Il-sung and representatives of both China's military and the U.S.-led UN command signed the armistice in a village located at the 38th parallel. But no one representing South Korea did. The armistice is a military agreement, not a bilateral one. It established the Demilitarized Zone, or DMZ, at the 38th parallel, which remains one of the most militarized borders in the world. Wartime control of South Korea's military is shared between South Korea and the U.S. That means South Korea cannot wage war against North Korea without American approval. Over the years, confrontations between the North and South, some of them fatal, have happened without triggering a full-scale war. Myung-gu Kang, who served in South Korea's military in the DMZ, says the presence of 25,000 U.S. troops in South Korea today serves as a deterrent for both Koreas. It's also a reminder of the Korean War's lessons.
Unification is a very, very important goal for the Korean people, but any military attempt to achieve the unification would be a really disastrous, choice and disastrous consequences. That may be the number one lesson. Second lesson is that we need to think about some options to end the Korean War.
In 2013, current dictator Kim Jong-un, Kim Il-sung's grandson, declared the armistice invalid. It wasn't the first time North Korea had done so. But as South Korea's conservative president, Yoon Suk-yeol, takes a harder line against the Kim regime than his predecessor and reaffirms South Korea's alliance with the U.S., which began before the Korean War, Kim's saber-rattling increases. Since coming to power in 2011, Kim Jong-un has claimed or been suspected of testing more than 200 weapons or weapon systems, including intercontinental ballistic missiles that can carry nuclear warheads to the U.S. That's according to the bipartisan think tank Center for Strategic and International Studies, which reported that as of April of this year, Kim Jong-un's average yearly rate of testing missiles outnumbers both his father's and grandfather's. Which does not surprise journalist Elizabeth Shim. She's reported on North Korea for the Associated Press and UPI.
North Korea's reason for being is about this constant desire to produce, to manufacture crisis, to keep people in a state of war.
Shim is writing a book about North Korea's obsession with appearing to be ready for war, that it helps the Kim regime stay legitimate in the eyes of North Korea's impoverished people. Their attention is also drawn to life outside their oppressed country, thanks to content-driven technology.
The Simpsons are very popular in North Korea because, people pass around endless on flash drives, copies of American cartoons, and they absolutely love entertainment from the United States and South Korea too, because South Korea has kind of overnight become a global, entertainment media powerhouse. In my book, I go into how it's North Korea playing defense because of these marketization forces that are affecting the population. And perhaps more importantly, we need to focus on not what the leadership does or says, but what the people are doing, how the population is changing, how their outlook is changing, how they're migrating outward, how they are obtaining more information about the outside world, and how defections have been, rising steadily after the Cold War.
Defections by North Koreans to the South number in the tens of thousands since 1998. Meanwhile, the 2009 battle deaths dataset compiled by the International Peace Research Institute in Oslo puts the casualty toll of the Korean War, both the dead and the missing, suffered by all parties to the war, at between 995,000 and 1.5 million, military and civilian. It also notes 3 to 4.5 million people in North Korea alone may have died from disease and famine related to the war. Mass killings of civilians by both sides may have taken at least another 200,000 lives. Meanwhile, nearly 37,000 Americans died in battle or are unaccounted for, with another 8,200 missing, and more than 100,000 Americans were wounded. North Korea's casualty count is not confirmed. President Eisenhower seemed to look decades ahead when he announced the armistice agreement in a televised address to the nation, quote, "We have won an armistice on a single battleground, not peace in the world. We may not now relax our guard, nor cease our quest." Nearly 5 million people died during the war, on both sides, military and civilian. At least half of them were civilians. And that would mean nearly 10% of the pre-war population in North and South Korea gone. Survivors of the war made the U.S. their new home. They settled in major cities and small towns across America, raised families, businesses, and pursued careers. Korean American Story, a nonprofit I co-chair that's dedicated to preserving the Korean American experience, has generously agreed to share its archive with Asian American Life. Here now are some of their stories of the war, in their own words.
So I went to law school. Only 1 month later, war started. So I'm staying with my mom at grandmom's home. Radio is announcing that possible can take a refugee to the south. The mother was insisting me, Mom, you better go back to the home, take care of father and sisters, brothers. We family separate. Now they are start catching all young men age over 16 under the name of the volunteers. If you love your country, you volunteer, join the North Korea, then go to front line. Where is your son? Mommy didn't answer. No time to say goodbye. I don't know where I'm going. So I know this is my last time to say goodbye. So later I found out that was the People's Bureau, secret agent. About 48 prisoners were classified political prisoner, eventually will be all shot. After 24 days, we had the order to march North Gate. So we are looking at it, oh, this is our last time. Then, all of a sudden, roaring airplane jet just now swing over the about. It's American airplane. So this is the best chance everybody, including North Korean soldiers, front to back, start running. Then run into the home. Mother couldn't recognize me. I lost about at least 30, 40 pounds. Mom, I'm Nam Young. Screamed. The mother cried, just to find a place I can hide somewhere, not the house. So brother took me destroyed one American Plaza Hotel, Plaza building, whatever, and the space. I stayed there until Incheon landing September 26. So I could see through the cannon hall, Korean flag is going up, Jungangcheon, the central building. I remember that I cried, just my tears coming down. Thank you, God.
When the war broke out, I was 13. I went out to the street and I saw people without shoes running down from the north. That was the beginning of the Korean War. I saw them, all adults and children, and I didn't know what was going on. Being a very conscientious student, I went to school, and there were the North Korean soldiers in the ground of the school. The teachers would say, you all go to a certain place and stay there. And I heard later that some of them were dragged off to join the Red Army. Those who were older than I was not old enough. I think during the Korean War, 2 words, fear and hunger. I tried to get food for my younger brothers and sisters. There were 6 of us. My mother had a baby during the war, and she couldn't feed the baby, so she died. Starved to death, the youngest sister. And my mother took her out. It was the winter time. After the war, my mother said that she didn't even remember where she buried her. And so dark days of fear and hunger, and then somehow inside myself, I thought, this is going to end. Someday, this is going to be over. I think it's just a youthful hope and optimism. When the North Korean army came down, we didn't even know, so we just stayed in Seoul and suffered. But second time the Chinese soldiers came, everybody left Seoul. We experienced what the communists did, and everybody followed. Long, long lines of people, refugees. So we went down. And then the war ended in 1953. The schools reopened, so everybody, all trooped back to Seoul. And of course, we had to rebuild our life in Seoul, where no buildings were standing.
Before Korean War broke out, we could not survive there, so we escaped. So whole family left North Korea, but then we couldn't live openly as a family, 2 by 2s. Gradually sneaked out of the village. I and my second oldest brother was the last one to escape. We had about 3-4 years life of struggle because we left everything in North Korea, and as a landowner, you cannot carry land on your back. Each one of us carried a backpack, not much, because we had to walk a lot to cross the border. And when we arrived, we didn't have a home. In North Korea, we had 3 homes. Here, no home, no job, nothing. The refugee life was hard. The Korean War was worse than that. I remember hearing shooting sounds, and we heard the war broke out. And my sister-in-law and I, on foot, went to look for my Army brother, Army soldier. He was a first lieutenant. And we went to Korean Army headquarters. They were emptied out already, either to the war or retreated or whatever. Nobody was there. So the war was just a terrible thing to experience. Of course, we couldn't stay in the Army apartment because we were refugees from North Korea and we were Army family. We had a double reason to be killed by communist soldiers. So we were running here, there, try to escape and try to eliminate my brother's Army clothes and any trace that shows that we were Army family. Somehow we escaped to countryside. I had to make a living. I was 15 and I followed village women who carry white rice to the city, sell that and bring some other item that country people buy. September 28 retreat day came, and I happened to be in Seoul City. And that night, UN shooting to force communist soldiers that were hiding in Namsan Mountain to chase them away or kill them. They were shooting toward the city, and how can you shoot only them? Shoot everybody else together and burn the whole city. And the communists, retreating communists, set the fire on the city. Seoul City was just turned into a battlefield. And I happened to be there that night. I took a bushel of rice and sold it and ready to buy rubber shoes tomorrow. And I was staying at my relative house inside of a city. And that night, every house was on fire. I had to escape. And the following morning, I had to go to a place where we used to stay because we hid some things there, our belongings. And then I had to cross so many bodies to get where I need to go. And just that area was covered by bodies. And everything burned down and destroyed down. Only thing I saw was a few chimneys, a few of them standing, and then a few wells standing. Otherwise, everything was down and covered with the bodies. And when I got there, the place we were staying, everything burned down to ashes.
전쟁이 참, 전쟁이라는 건 참 있어서 안 되는 일인데 그때 생각을 하면 내가 자다가도 벌떡 일어나요. 내가 이렇게 드러누워 있을 때가 아니지. 내가 일어나서 기도해야지. 우리나라를 하나님이 지켜주시는데 계속 지켜주시길 바라는데 요즘같이 이렇게 또 어려움을 당할 때 보면은 참 마음이 아파요. 그래서 사실 잠 안 와요. 내가 이렇게 잠자도 되겠는가. 왜냐면은 나는 피랑 가다가 아이를 잃었고 6.25 때 피랑 가다가 등에 업고 가던 아이를 길에서 죽어서 길에서 묻었어요. 나는 너무 아파서 지금도 자다가 벌떡 일어나요. 그리고 이런 슬픔이 우리나라에 다시 없어야 할 텐데 요즘 마냥 전염병이 유행했어요. 대구에 천연두가 있었어. 그걸 몰랐으니까 뭐 20대 엄마가 뭘 알아? 그냥 얻고 내려갔는데 대구에 가서 천연두가 왔어. 그걸 몰랐거든. 그래가지고 애가 천연두가 걸려서 그래서 그냥 여간방에서 간 거야. 하나님이 주신 평안 가지고 웃고 살지만은 사실 마음 한구석에는 너무 아픈 상처가 있어요.
I had no money, nothing. See, I got a job as a tutor at night, and during daytime I had laboring at the opening can to the rim off and cut the middle so make a flat sheet out of the can. I did the whole day, whole night, and I made a living. But that ended when the war started, only 4 months later. So then I was sure that MacArthur would come and save us. So I stayed in Seoul. I had a lot of difficulty. I got caught.
Caught by whom?
By North Korean soldiers.
Can you talk a little bit?
They want the volunteer army, and a young man was picked and become volunteer army. So you had to hide from that. So I would hide, but you can hide only about 2-3 days because you get hungry. You cannot eat and hide at the same time. So you had to come out. So you do something to get something to eat. Once you eat something, you hide again. You do 3-4 days, then you go back. And I was caught 4 times. I escaped 4 times.
And how did you escape?
Well, they would usually try to take one place to the other, place, from this station to next and to headquarters. And you just escape, so.
Run.
And then one last time I was at the Sonam Sedaemun 경찰서, and I said, I can't escape him. I don't want it anymore. So I would just volunteer. So I rather die eating. But then I was near the gate and the little door. Suddenly the door opened and there was a guard there. The guard left. And at the time the door opened, it was big like that. So I said, this got to be omen for me to escape. So next time this happened, I will go. Because I wasn't going to escape. The next time he went, I just got out and left, and I escaped.
And no one shot you?
Yeah, well, it really, you are running for your life.
Many Koreans did not leave, and those who stayed in South Korea watched it transition from one of the poorest countries in the world to a thriving one today. One of them was Major General Sung Guk-yoon. His daughter is my friend and colleague, Kyung-yoon, a correspondent for Asian American Life. In September 2020, she reported on how her father played a major role in the war. Here now is Kyung-yoon's tribute to the late Major General Sung Guk-yoon.
I'm Kyung-yoon, and the story I'm about to share is a personal one. This year marked the 70th anniversary of the start of the Korean War, and my story is about an extraordinary man who helped to save the lives of hundreds of American soldiers during that war, and who happens to be my father. 아빠하고 나하고 만든 꽃밭에. This is my father and me singing a beloved Korean children's song that he taught me when I was a little girl. The song tells a story of a father and child planting flowers in a garden. One of my earliest memories is singing the song with my dad, who has planted seeds of generosity and sacrifice throughout his life. He's always been a hero to me. 70 years ago, my father was a young army captain fighting in the Korean War. On June 25, 1950, the communist North Korean government launched a surprise attack on the Republic of Korea in the south. In 3 days, the North Korean army, supported by the Soviet Union, had captured the southern capital city of Seoul. the United Nations Security Council immediately voted to send international military forces to support South Korea. The first UN ground forces to enter the battle was Task Force Smith, made up of about 540 men of the U.S. 24th Infantry Division and the 52nd Field Artillery Battalion. My father had been training with the American soldiers of the 52nd in Kyushu, Japan, when they received orders to immediately deploy to Korea.
그 부대가 한국 전장에 저번이가 디스패치 되게 됐다고. 그러니까 와서 아무것도 모르니까 저 한국 chief of staff 캡틴 그 당시 나 캡틴인데 캡틴 연을 달라고. We don't know anything about Korea. The train, the people. 어떻게 그 당한 한국 코리안 chief of staff가 해가지고서 나를 미국 부대로 가라고 그래서.
Because a liaison officer. Liaison officer.
liaison officer.
On July 5, 1950, my father was embedded with Task Force Smith when they made a stand in Osan City in what would go down in history as the first battle of UN forces in the Korean War. The goal was to delay the North Korean advance. My father was the only South Korean in that battle.
중미령이라는데 거기에서 나오는데 인민군이 그때 Russian made 탱크를 가지고서 페네트레이트 쫙 해가지고서 미국 저 타스크 포스 스미스가 말하자면 employed 당했어.
The soldiers of Task Force Smith were outnumbered nearly 10-1 by the 5,000 North Korean infantry, but fought courageously. Many died in the battle, and Task Force Smith was eventually forced to retreat. My father was in the first jeep, navigating the harrowing retreat through unfamiliar terrain, with so many lives hanging in the balance, but ultimately he was able to lead some 200 soldiers to safety.
내가 앞장을 서가지고 저 포스트 지프에 타고 거기 남아있던 한 미군 한 200명 가량의 그 차를 갖다 다 빼가지고서 해가지고서 내가 앞장 서가지고서 빠져나와서 살았다고. 그 자리에 저 인민군 노스코리안 인펜트리맨이 한 시간 후에 우리가 있던 자리에 도착을 했대요. 그러니까 그 한 시간만 늦었으면은 아버지도 그렇고 모든 200명의 저 프리즌 오브 워가 됐던가 그러지 않으면 죽었던가 그랬을 거야.
My father fought many more battles during the Korean War, but he also found love when he met my mother during the war, and the two were married on a cold January day in 1953, 7 months before an armistice officially ended the conflict. My father was eventually promoted to Major General in the South Korean Army and posted as military attaché to Washington, D.C.
From his service with Task Force Smith in the opening battle of the Korean War, to his continuing support to soldiers of both nations' armies, through professional development presentations, Major General retired Yoon has earned a place of honor in the history of the U.S. Army.
For his service to Korea and the United States, he was honored by the American military in July of 2020 at Camp Humphreys in Korea, the largest U.S. overseas military base, where a major installation gate was named after him.
Major General Yoon fought in the battles in Osan, Kumkang, Nakdong-kang, Pohang, and Seoul throughout the Korean War. He spent 24 years of dedicated service to his nation and the ROK-U.S. alliance, serving in various positions including military attaché and minister of the Korean Embassy in the United States. It's our distinct honor to have the first U.S. Army installation gate in Korea named after a Korean Korea War veteran.
My father often thinks about his comrades of Task Force Smith and all the soldiers who perished fighting for freedom for South Korea. He recently spoke with Arirang TV in Korea about his hopes that future generations will never forget their sacrifices.
어린 세대들, 그 선배들이
희생을 하면서 나라를 지켜준 그것을 그냥 공짜로 이거 그대로 놔두면 될 것이다 하는 막연한 생각을 가지고는 안 돼. Freedom is not free.
He's grateful for his life and to have been given the chance to see his children grow up and have children of their own. The foundation for his life is his faith in God, handed down to him by his mother.
마더가 나를 위해 가지고서 밤낮 기도를 한 거라. 그렇게 기도의 힘으로 내가 그렇게 많은 사람을 같이 살리고 죽지 않고 그렇게 된 게 어머니의 기도지.
Soldier, hero, diplomat, and to me, a father who taught me about courage, faith, love, and how to bloom wherever I'm planted.
피었습니다.
Wow! I love you. Kyung Yoon, Asian American Life.
I'm joined now by Kyung Yoon, who produced the piece you just saw. We also have with us Dr. Harry Frankie Rivera, a history professor at Bloomfield College and the author of Soldiers of the Nation, Military Service and Modern Puerto Rico, 1868 to 1952. He's also chair of the New York chapter of the National Puerto Rican Agenda. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Kyung, let's start with you. I wanted to hear more from you about what your father knew about his role at the time, because he was with Task Force Smith at a time when they had several weeks of training only. Many of them were not combat ready, let alone experienced. There were criticisms much later about how under-equipped and under-trained they were. Did he realize how pivotal he would be?
No, I don't think at the time that he had any idea. And when I think about it, he was 24 years old, and he was a captain in the Army, and he was a young man. And this was something that I think defines what heroes are about. They just don't really consider and strategize too much. They're called upon to serve, and they stood up. And I think what it was when you think of the Task Force Smith, the men who were in this first battle of the UN forces of the Korean War, it wasn't that they were, the most prepared or the most whatever. They were just the closest by, because they happened to be training in Kyushu, Japan, and they were a part of the United States Army, forces that were post World War II. So when the UN resolution happened, then they were called upon to be deployed because they could get to Korea very quickly. So if you consider that the invasion happened on June 25th, the first battle happened on July the 5th. It's because they were deployed right from Japan. When other forces were making the journey over, it would take them much longer. So thank goodness they were there.
He has since passed on, since you first reported back in 2020 his story. Did you have a lot of conversations with him afterwards? Like, you said at first he didn't realize how pivotal his role would be, but looking back decades later, how did he characterize his time with that particular experience?
I think being a part of Task Force Smith was a defining moment for my father. It was not the only one, because he went on actually from being an Army captain in the Korean Army to becoming a two-star general. And he fought in many, many more battles of the Korean War, and was later the military attaché for Korea, for the Republic of Korea to the United States, which is why I and our family wound up coming to America. He talked to all of us, our family, and about what this meant to him. And I think he would always say, in English, that freedom is not free, that it's not something that we can just take for granted, that it's an outcome because people pay the price. And he really saw that. And he would talk about so many of the men and his fellow soldiers in Task Force Smith, they were all Americans. He was the only Korean in this first battle of the Korean War. But it left a lasting impression on him. There was the commander, whose name was Colonel Miller Perry, and he often talked about his bravery.
What did it mean to your father to be recognized in his lifetime? You touch on it briefly in your story, in your tribute to him, but I mean, that must have been such an unusual experience for any veteran of the Korean War.
Yeah, and you just realize that some things are so random in a way. So he was this 24-year-old Army captain getting trained in Kyushu, Japan. But in the process, he was eating meals and trying to practice English with these American soldiers. And he did establish a relationship with Colonel Miller Perry, who was at that time about in his 40s, and he a colonel. I mean, he was a pretty senior guy in the U.S. Army. But I think my father impressed him because he spoke some English. He had the will, you know, to reach out and to be in this learning mode. So when Task Force Smith received orders to immediately deploy to Korea, to South Korea, Colonel Perry went to the Chief of Staff of the Korean Army and requested my father as a liaison officer, just because they didn't speak any English, they didn't know Korea at all, and so it was really important, I think, for both sides that this happened. And then to your second question, I think my father, in 2020, his health started to decline, but he was still in his wheelchair, but he was able to go to many of the commemorations for the 70th anniversary of the start of the Korean War. And he was actually, when he was honored with the gate being named for him at Camp Humphrey in Pyeongtaek, Korea, he was able to cut the ribbon. He was able to soak it all in. And I think that was an ultimate. But I will share a little story that my mother told me, that when that happened, my father said to her that night, he said, "This was amazing, that this is like a cherry on the top of the ice cream sundae of my life." But he said, but the most important gift in my life has been that I could be the husband of Chang Young-shim, who is my mother, and they held hands.
And that is actually a really good pivoting point to you, Dr. Frankie Rivera, because you have another book coming out. It focuses on the 65th Infantry, which was the only Hispanic infantry in the entire U.S. Army, full Hispanic, and it has a very long history, but the Korean War was really the first time that they were able to be tested. Their mettle was tested on the field because they had not been given that opportunity during World War I and World War II. Can you talk a little bit about this amazing opportunity that the Borinqueniers, as they called themselves, created for themselves because the Korean War had called them to task to take part in the very first confrontation of the Cold War?
I think you're completely right saying that they created this opportunity for themselves because one of the reasons that they are trusted in battle this time, something that they've been asking for, Puerto Rican leaders have been asking for, just like African Americans in the past, is because they had just completed huge military exercise in Vieques Island, and they outperformed the other units. They played the aggressor, and they defended the island against U.S. forces coming to, and Allied forces coming to liberate the island. The performance was off the charts. So this is one. The other, as you mentioned, the United States was very unprepared, and the Puerto Ricans have been volunteering to go to war. And this is a momentous historical point in Puerto Rican history in which not only the individuals, but Puerto Rican as a whole are trying to demonstrate that we were ready for independence or autonomy or self-rule. And part of these soldiers going to Korea is to prove that Puerto Ricans are second to none and that they deserve self-rule. And because of this, the Borinqueniers, as we know them, they came to be once in Korea to become national icons representing what the future of Puerto Rico would be or should be.
Can you talk about how they made a name for themselves to the point where even General MacArthur hailed them publicly and said he was very proud to have them under his command. What did they do at the very beginning of the war?
Well, they arrived there in October, and they quickly became part of this sweeping movement going north. The San perimeter has been broken, so they are in pursuit of the North Korean armies, and they are performing very well. There's a series of battles in which the North Koreans trying to counterattack, and in one case, a full division, a full North Korean division is stopped by the 65th, which is just a regiment, and they almost ran out of ammunition during that night, and they had to send a message in the clear. They were running out of ammunition because of the weights and weights of North Korean soldiers, and they received a cargo drop of ammunition in the last, when they're in a very perilous situation, and they call that episode that part of their history when manna fell from the sky and the ammunition was the manna, because it's said in the last minute, and they continued the fight, and the North Korean broke the engagement. So they're in this, they're operating in this initial part of the war, in which is very mobile. The Allied armies the United Nations armies are in pursuit, and then the Chosin Reservoir happened, that famous battle in which the 1st Marine is decimated by mostly the Chinese volunteers. And in the port of Hunan, the Allied command, the United Nations command, established a perimeter to try to receive and rescue the 1st Marine, and they created a task force, and the main element of that task force to go further beyond that perimeter was the 65th Infantry. They distinguished themselves in these battles. I remember one day interviewing a Puerto Rican engineer back in Puerto Rico, and he gave me a picture of him and his aide being the last United Nations soldiers evacuating that port of Hunan, right? In that event, right, that's 1950, that's, I met, while doing research in Puerto Rico, I met an elderly woman, and when I told her what I was looking at, she said, oh, that was the saddest Christmas in Puerto Rico, because we didn't know if the boys were safe, and there was a news blackout because of the whole operation evacuating the United Nations forces. And on the 26th, that picture was released, and she told me, on the we celebrate Christmas on the 26th, not the 25th, because then they felt like they could breathe. So they participated in many battles, the kind of warfare that the United States military is good for, mobile warfare, and they performed. Why did they perform? Because they had not been allowed to fight before, and they were superbly trained, and every soldier in that regiment was a volunteer who loved their job.
There was also a tragic chapter in the history of the Burinkaneers, though, because about a year into their service in the Korean War, they faced prejudice and injustice, and that included being court-martialed.
Yes.
And it took decades for the 65th to restore their reputation. Can you talk a little bit about what those court-martials were about?
Well, 91 soldiers and an officer were charged in court-martials, charges from willful disobedience of a superior's officer command, cowardice before the enemy, running before the enemy. And this happened this is for events that took place in the autumn of 1952.
And these were trumped up charges because they were actually standing up and saying, we will not take on a particular order to try and retake an outpost because they believed it was a suicide mission, correct?
Yes, this is actually called the Battle of Jackson Heights, and the hill that they were tasked with taking and keeping was a hill dominated by two higher peaks, which were in control of the Chinese Volunteer Forces artillery. So it was bombed non-stop with no counter-artillery fire from the United Nations. So at a certain point, the Chinese are not even contesting the units going into Jackson Heights, because they just let them go there and destroy them piece by piece without the infantry units being able even to fire back. So after about a week of this back and forth, and another unit being destroyed, the soldiers threw the rifles on the ground and refused to go back. The Puerto Rican colonel tried to round them up and force them to get there. And even though he tried to rally them again, he was partially blamed for the debacle. And he was relieved of command, and the Puerto Rican soldiers were court-martialed.
So there was an Army investigation as well, and it was determined that racism, disorganization, poor leadership led to those court-martials to begin with. So how long did it take for the 65th to restore their reputation and to try and get their credit back?
Well, legally, the record has not been restored because the Congressional Medal that they received say that it's because of their service in World War I, World War II, and Korea, when in fact it's because of having, just like the Tuskegee Airmen in World War II, the African-American aviators, to actually fight on two fronts against a very racist military at the time, officers with a lot of racial bias and prejudice, and the North Koreans and the Chinese volunteer armies. So the Army never recanted the sentences. They were just, after the review, the U.S. Army concluded that the charges were correct, but that they were to remit the remaining of the sentences and put the soldiers back in other units and desegregate the regiment, which they say it was to save, the military say it was to bring the regiment back to fully function, but the Puerto Ricans, the Borinqueniers and Puerto Rico saw it as another punishment, that the regiment was no longer going to be Puerto Rican. So the military never actually changed the record.
Okay, so we're still waiting for
yes,
for that to happen, and you as a historian are hoping for that to happen. I understand though that you were honored with the ability to receive the gold medal for a member of the 65th, Dr. Frank Bonilla, who was the founder and director of Hunter College's Center for Puerto Rican Studies. What was that like for you?
It was a very surreal experience, and I was the master of ceremony in that at that event. I helped plan it, and I had researched these men and their families and what they did, and the whole ceremony was very emotional. And when one of the organizers told me that Dr. Bonilla's daughter could not make it, that if I could receive the medal on his behalf, on behalf of his family, it was really an honor. And when I received it, all of this came together like, I can't believe this is happening, because Frank Bonilla, who was born and raised in New York and who served in World War II, he came to discover his Puerto Ricanness after getting hurt during the Battle of the Bulge, being sent to recovery in a hospital and then to a replacement depot, and then assigned to the 65th Infantry. And then he got to meet the Borinqueniers, actually I think already in Germany, occupying Germany, and that's when he started to write about these people. Who are they? They played the anthem, and they feel this pride. They raised the Puerto Rican flag, which it was the flag of the regiment. And the first time that Frank Bonilla ever visited Puerto Rico was when the Borinqueniers were demobilized and sent back to their home station in Puerto Rico.
Oh, wow.
And he decided that he will learn about his roots.
Oh, wow. So you've both been touched by legacy as a result of the Korean War. As we conclude this chat, I'd like to ask you, each of you, to talk about what you want the American people to understand about the war. Kyung, let's start with you.
I'm sorry, it's such a big question for me, because I've been touched, obviously, in a macro sense and historically, and then I've been touched in a very personal way. I think I'm really left with what my father always said, and which I already mentioned around freedom not being free. That is something that, as we think of the Korean War as often being forgotten, that there were so many sacrifices, so many examples of what it means to stand up for something. When we look at South Korea today, which is such a marked contrast to what we see in North Korea. And
it's
not
flourished as a nation.
It has flourished, and there is just no better comparison of, I think, where systems and policies and politics can make a difference in people's lives, in the openness, in terms of opportunities. That said, I really want to emphasize that it is not about the people. It is not about the North Korean people. It is not about the South Korean people. It is about decisions that are made statewide or around by countries, by superpowers that have long-term implications. So for me personally, my father was born in Ganggae, which is a part of very North Korea, near the Manchurian border. And you know, he was able to make it to South Korea, but he personally saw and was very moved by, you know, what the impact of communism was, and that's what moved him to join the Army War College, to be a part of that effort. My grandmother made it out. His mother. My grandfather did not. I've never known my grandfather. One of his brothers didn't make it out. And so I know that I have, you know, I'm sure they're no longer alive, but I have cousins. I mean, these people are very, very real to me and dear to me. And so
and
I
yet
still
unknown, because you've
and
never
yet
met them.
unknown. And so I still hold out the hope that my country, of where I was born, can be reunified one day, and maybe in my lifetime. But boy, you know, we're going to be getting to a place very soon where there's not going to be a single person who remembers a unified Korea. And you know, it's incredibly sad, and it's something that I'm so glad that we're talking about this, and that there are efforts that are ongoing to keep this front and center, and to find solutions that actually can have an enduring impact.
Dr. Frankie Rivera?
Well, I think that's something really important about the participation of the Puerto Rican soldiers in this war, is that they came to incarnate a philosophy and a belief that Puerto Rico deserved, the Puerto Ricans deserve autonomy and self-rule. And at this moment, the current constitution that Puerto Rico has now was being created, and the soldiers there's so many pictures of the soldier reading parts of the constitution as it was being written, and with comment from them saying, now I have two constitutions to defend. So this war, to me, is the most important war in Puerto Rican history for what it did for Puerto Rico, created a modern Puerto Rico that came to be kind of concluded. It's not finished yet, and I think that what these soldiers fought for, which was either complete inclusion or complete independence for Puerto Rico, and moving forward, self-government still something that hasn't been delivered, and that we had to look back at this war and what the Puerto Ricans were fighting for, democracy and self-determination, and realize that that is an incomplete chapter in the greater American experience.
Okay, Dr. Harry Frankie Rivera, historian, history professor, and author, and Kyung Yoon, correspondent for Asian American Life. Thank you so much for talking with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's take a look at a clip now from the documentary, The Borinqueneers.
Yo diría que el 65 es parte de la historia de Puerto Rico y es algo natural de allí, como lo es el yunque, como lo es el morro, como las montañas de Puerto Rico.
El honor más grande que Dios me ha dado a mí es el haber sido miembro del 75 Infantería.
I feel like it would be my obligation too, to fight for the country. Even if I'm Puerto Rico, you know, I'm American too.
I was very glad that Puerto Ricans were on my side Almost 95% casualties during the entire.
Nos estaba llevando a una masacre y por eso yo me negué.
These become the largest mass court-martials of the Korean War.
There was a stigma in the history of the U.S. Army.
With meritorious service to country since 1899, with honors, decorations, and tributes, the Borinquen toughest fight would not be on the battlefield.
And now, my report on the documentary Crossings. It's about women peace activists who traveled to North Korea on a mission to raise awareness about the Korean War and how it affected the people of North Korea. They made the trip several years ago, and a documentary filmmaker followed them on their unusual journey. Following that report, we'll chat with one of the peacemakers from that journey in our studio.
Most people that travel to North Korea, they come here with preconceived notions. That the people have no independent free thinking. I wanted the delegation to be able to just really experience the North Korean people as human beings.
That's the voice of Christine Ahn, the executive director of Women Cross DMZ. The documentary Crossings follows Ahn and a delegation of activists in 2015 as they travel to North Korea. Their plan is to peacefully march through the DMZ into South Korea.
That militarized border was always meant to just be temporary, and 70 years later now, it has still kept millions of families apart.
Among the delegates, luminaries of other women-led anti-war and equity movements. Gloria Steinem, Code Pink founder Medea Benjamin, filmmaker Abigail Disney, and Nobel Peace Laureates Mairead Maguire of Northern Ireland and Lima Bowie of Liberia.
My country, Liberia, was at war from 1989 to 2003. We started the women's movement and did the protest for 2.5 years. We were able to reach out to both the warring parties and the government, which contributed to the end of the Liberian War.
When my sister's 3 little children were all killed in a violent clash between British Army and an active service unit of the Irish Republican Army. It just was the spark for thousands and thousands of people, 90% women, coming out to march for peace to say, we can solve this without killing each other. And it made room for the political leaders to move forward towards a peace process.
There are 3 goals with the Peace March: establish a peace treaty, reunite separated families, and include women leaders at all levels of the peace process. Marching was simple. Organizing it was anything but.
I think there's a general narrative about the war that it's not only forgotten, but that it's a conflict over there in Korea, and that it has nothing to do with, us as Americans.
Crossings creator and Emmy Award-winning director Deanne Borsche Lim is a Korean-American adoptee. Her film challenges the established worldview of the North, that people there do not deserve empathy.
I think that it's very hard to look at people there, as human beings. I think that we also have a tendency as Americans to view ourselves as being free of ideology and being free of propaganda.
This scene in the doc shows a connective moment. The delegates meet North Korean war survivors, including Ri Ok-hui.
두 손을 모두 잃게 되었습니다. 지금 저희 나이는 72살이 되었습니다. 그러니 그때는 제가 7살이었습니다. 가장 고통과 가슴 아플 것은 우리 어머니들과 아이들이라고 하게 저는 이 세상의 전쟁을 막고 감사합니다.
I may never get to see the peace, but I need to work towards it.
82-year-old activist Ae Young Chae was born into a Korea still occupied by Japan and before it was partitioned. Her trip with the delegation was her first time back since emigrating as a little girl.
It's not necessarily saying that women are better or smarter than men, but the men have had the ball all these years. Not only has it failed to hit the goal, it has made things so precarious and dangerous. I think that one of the things this film can show, be of value for, is that it sees how people can do the unthinkable.
What we have on our side is that the American people are sick of endless war. I think we want a recalibration of how we are spending our money. And the way that we're sold is to continue to vilify enemies like North Korea.
Former President Donald Trump's travel ban to the North is still in effect. Meanwhile, Crossings has been screened at the UN, the State Department, and at film festivals across the U.S. and Canada. In late December, Christine Ahn was awarded the Peace Summit Medal for social activism at the World Summit of Nobel Peace Laureates in Pyeongchang, South Korea. For more information about Crossings, visit moofilms.org or womencrossdmz.org. Our guest now is a retired U.S. Army colonel and former State Department official. Colonel Ann Wright served a total of 29 years in both active duty and the Army Reserves. Colonel Wright then spent 16 years with the State Department. She resigned from the State Department in protest of the invasion of Iraq in 2003 and has devoted her life to peace activism ever since. Colonel Ann Wright, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much. A pleasure to be with you.
I first wanted to ask you about the Korea Peace Campaign, which was started by Veterans for Peace about 20 years ago now. What was the goal of that campaign, and what are its major successes and failures since?
Well, the Korea Peace Campaign of Veterans for Peace is one of the many campaigns that we have in this international Veterans for Peace organization. And certainly the goal of the Korea Peace Campaign and Veterans for Peace is trying to end war. And as we know, the armistice that was signed 70 years ago, July 27th, 1953, it's just an armistice. It's not the end of the war. So for the 20 years that the Korea Peace Campaign of Veterans for Peace has been in existence, we've been trying to mobilize public opinion to say we need to have a peace treaty. And with a peace treaty, hopefully that will solve the tensions on the Korean Peninsula and prevent any sort of war there again.
What are some tangible examples of you convincing people, especially elected representatives, that a peace treaty has to be established now?
So the concrete things, every now and then things happen, like during the Clinton administration. There was the agreed framework where the North Koreans pulled back from their nuclear program. At that time, it was just nuclear energy that they were working on. It subsequently developed into a nuclear weapons program because of the lack of attention or lack of effort from the international community to at least address the concerns of the North Korean government. And those concerns are that there will be a regime change, which is one of the products of U.S. foreign policy, as we well know, with over 20 coups that the United States has sponsored over the last many years. And the North Koreans are smart people. They know what the history of the United States is, so they are looking toward a peace treaty that would mean that they would not be another victim of U.S. regime change.
But what can you say or do through the Korea Peace Campaign with Veterans for Peace that would convince the Biden administration that they should take that stance now?
The weight that we bring is as veterans, and veterans saying that we've seen war, that we know what it is, and we know that ultimately there has to be a peace agreement anyway to end wars. So putting pressure on all the congressional delegations that our membership represent is really important. And of course, having events in Washington, D.C., where the administration itself can see that there is great public support for peace rather than war on the Korean Peninsula.
Headlines show that there are missile tests that are conducted continuously by the North Korean regime. What do you know of that makes it more urgent on this 70th anniversary of the armistice to try and end the war?
Well, I myself live in Hawaii, and Hawaii is the headquarters of the Indo-Pacific Command, the unified command for the United States military, which covers everything from the west coast of the United States all the way across to India. And from the Indo-Pacific Command are organized all of these military exercises, both land, sea, and air exercises that go on in the Western Pacific and that go on the Korean Peninsula. There has been an ever-increasing tempo to these military exercises. Every 2 years is the largest naval military exercise in the world. It's called Rim of the Pacific. It's held in the waters off Hawaii. And then on the alternate years, land-based military exercises are held both in South Korea and then this year also in Australia, where over 30,000 military from the United States, Australia, other Asian countries, and even NATO countries are coming to Australia to practice land-based military exercises. In the sea, the United States, through using as a rationale the freedom of the seas aspect of international law, saying that all parts of the ocean should be available to everyone. So the United States has been having freedom of navigation military exercises, really, very close to the continent of Asia, very close to China, going through disputed territorial areas with armadas, not just one little ship, but they'll send an aircraft carrier, and each aircraft carrier has at least 20 ships and submarines that are associated with it. Sometimes the United States has had 2 aircraft carriers in the South China Sea and then going up toward Japan, past Taiwan to Japan, and then up into South Korea. It's not just the United States that's doing that. NATO countries, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization is now sending military weaponry and vessels into the Pacific. But the potential, the probability of something happening when you have that many military and that much military equipment all practicing war is very high.
A resumption of active hostilities, such as what we saw between 1950 and 1953, how much more impactful a war would it be in that region for the United States, for China, for Russia?
Well, it's called nuclear weapons. That's the main problem. All of the countries that you've named, the U.S., China, Russia, all have nuclear weapons, and they may use them. They all say they're a deterrent, although the United States now has said, the Biden administration has said that it can be a first use from the United States, which is kind of a change in U.S. policies. We've never actually said that. So all of that is very worrisome, that indeed, if there is a conflict with either of the four, between the four or among the four, the potential for the use of nuclear weapons is there. And it's not just one nuclear weapon. That will not be what happens.
You've been to North Korea. You joined Women Cross DMZ on their trip in a bid to march across the demilitarized zone in a peace march. So having been there, what is your view on how willing they would be to sit down again? Because there was a missed opportunity in 2018 at the Hanoi summit between U.S. administration and North Korean regime negotiators. Who reaches across and extends the hand first?
Well, I think the United States must do that. I mean, we are a much larger country by 10 times, 100 times. I think there are 28 million people that live in North Korea, and there we have 360 million here. We have an arsenal of thousands of nuclear weapons, and they have, well, they've exploded 6. We don't know really how many they have, but it's probably not many. The United States, to the North Koreans, is the aggressor. It is the country they're fearful of, that the United States may try to overthrow the government of North Korea. They're not fearful of the Russians. They're not fearful of the Chinese. They're fearful of the United States. Right now, the Biden administration says that they are reaching out behind the scenes, but the North Koreans are not responding. Well, if the Biden administration would look to see what happened during the Trump administration when the North Koreans did respond, and that was that the U.S. said they would suspend its military operations, its military exercises in South Korea. And we did. For 4 years, we did not have military exercises, which normally the exercises are centered on regime change in North Korea. And the North Koreans know it because they read in the newspaper what the names of the U.S. military exercises are. And some of them are named so diplomatically as decapitation. Well, that sends a signal, doesn't it? So I think it's incumbent on the U.S. to not just, well, initially you go behind the scenes, but as we saw in the Trump administration, then you go public, that you are working to try to have dialogue with the North Koreans, and that we, the U.S., are taking a step to indicate our sincerity, which would be suspending military operations and exercises in South Korea, something that we are doing exactly the opposite of right now. Now, from the U.S. perspective, we have a very hard line on what we say the North Koreans must do before we'll sign a peace agreement, and that is they have to denuclearize, meaning they have to give up everything. Well, the North Koreans are smart people, and they've seen what happens to other countries. They've seen what happened to Libya when the Libyans stopped their program. They're not about to give up anything because they don't trust the United States.
What is it that they want in the end?
Well, if you read the New Year's Day address that Kim Jong-un gives to his country every single New Year's Day, you can find very easily what it is. They would like to have peace. They would like to have an opportunity to increase their economy, not spend so much on defense, on their nuclear weapons, their ballistic missiles, and actually do things for their own countrymen and women, which can help raise the standard of living, can help with medical things, all the stuff that we like for our own country. That's what the North Korean government wants for their country. But as long as there is this threat that the government will be overthrown, then they are spending so much of their national gross product into the military equipping of their defense posture.
What would you say to people who say that this is a regime that is erratic, that is untrustworthy, that is still a sworn enemy as the Korean War continues?
Well, I would say that we have to look at worldwide. The United States deals with all sorts of government leaders that have track records that are not particularly good. I mean, we deal with people that have human rights, or countries that have horrific human rights abuses. We deal with Saudi Arabia. We deal with Turkey. We deal with China. And of course, it'll be thrown back at us. We in the United States have some pretty severe human rights violations too. I would say that we, and it is a family. It's a family that has led North Korea for 70 years. The only hope that one would ever have that the people of North Korea have an opportunity to actually pick the leaders that they want is if they don't have to spend so much money on military, that things kind of go back to, or go to a normal life where you're not spending so much money on the military, that the standard of living for people is rising and rising and rising, and the expectations of the people are rising. That is, in my opinion, the way that there may be within the country of North Korea the opportunity for the people of North Korea to determine their own future. But until that happens, I mean, the only way that can happen is if the threat of an invasion and decapitation of the government finally ends.
Thank you, Colonel Enright, for your time today.
It's been a real pleasure. Thank you, Vivian. Thank you.
We end this special with a look at an article published on October 5th, 1951 in U.S. News and World Report. According to a spokeswoman at the paper, it's not clear if this was the first ever use of the word forgotten in describing the Korean War, but it seems to have stuck. We hope that, if anything, this special has shown that it should be anything but forgotten. Thank you for watching The Forgotten War, 70 years after the armistice, a special presentation of Asian American Life and CUNY TV. And now we present you with a screening of the documentary, The Borinqueneers. Thank you for watching our special, The Forgotten War, 70 years after the armistice, a special presentation of Asian American Life and CUNY TV. I'm Vivian Lee.